Hello, everybody, and welcome to the DesignWell Podcast. Once upon a time, Dr. Brock Chisholm, the first Director General of the World Health Organization, famously stated that without mental health, there can be no true physical health. And there's something to be said about that, with stress and other negative mental conditions being able to manifest themselves as physical symptoms like ulcers, headaches, or even worse in some cases. But aside from that, mental health is something that should be preserved even without its connection to physical health, as good mental well-being can greatly improve one's quality of life. Even before COVID, the topic of mental health had been ever present among professionals, especially in the workplace setting. Now it has seemingly exploded in importance. My guest on the podcast today is Hannah Hackathorn, Senior Principal and Head of Design at Unispace, a global workplace strategy, design, and construction company dedicated to creating experiential spaces for the rapidly changing world. For Hannah, design has a very important role to play in the current mental health crisis. More than just foosball tables and trendy office designs once touted by tech startups of the early 2000s, Hannah believes that workplaces should function for the people who inhabit them, taking an incredibly human-centered approach in her projects. So, if you're interested in learning more about Hannah's work at Unispace or how design can start to benefit mental health within commercial settings, feel free to stick around for what we have in store.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked what you saw, be sure to hit the like button on your way out, and also subscribe to DesignWell's YouTube channel and hit the bell icon if you want to stay informed of any new updates. Alternatively, you can find any of our podcasts over on Apple or Spotify and leave a review there.
So, Hannah, I would like to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name is Hannah Hackathorn. I am a senior principal, head of design at Unispace. I head up our design team across North America as well as LATAM as well.
Now, the reason why we're meeting today is to talk about mental health in the office. And so that's something that even before COVID kind of kicked in, that was becoming a much greater focus in the office. But from your experience, would you say that COVID has really helped kind of accelerate that focus, or has it mostly stayed the same?
I think it absolutely accelerated. Mental wellness and mental health has been a taboo subject that people don't really want to freely discuss, and especially around the workplace as well. But I think with pandemic, where it kind of leveled everybody's playing field, we're all going through a similar situation, the anxiety that everybody's feeling, the fear of missing out, the balancing the work-life balance. While we have an autonomy to work where we want to work and how we want to work, but I think a lot of things that most people are experiencing is, one, being completely segregated from their team member. We're all very collaborative and social in nature, and that's who we are as a human being, but being detached from it all. Some people are not as fortunate to have a family member during the lockdown, and they're kind of somewhat left alone and removed from their friends and removed from their colleagues. And also being a parent giver, we're all going through teaching at, learning at home, working at home together, and everybody's situation is different. And that really escalated even further in roles and responsibility you have. For myself, I have 9 years old, and during lockdown, both my husband and I, we have a full-time job, and we had to step in and be a parent and a teacher at the same time as well. And it creates a bit of a challenge when you're trying to get your work and, back-to-back meetings with your colleagues and attempting to teach third graders and, balancing that. And I think everybody's situation is so different. And I think we are all starting to feel more openly communicating because everybody's in the same situation. So I do think that it did escalate the conversation further, which is definitely healthy.
Now, in tandem with that, because I've been noticing the same thing with, you could say that with a lot of different elements of the built environment right now, where for air quality, for instance, that's a conversation that is definitely accelerated. But one of the things I've noticed for that is that even though the conversation is a lot more prominent, the adoption rates are kind of lagging behind. And so the follow-up question I have to that is, how is the adoption looking for design for mental space and for mental health in these spaces?
It's from my perspective, I think it's definitely a challenge that's brought to the table much more recently. I think the office place design, workplace design in the past has been somewhat formulaic, right? We focused a lot around the performance of the space, the efficiency of the space, and that's what we used to drive the success of the project. Whereas now it's about the people. It's a human-centric design, and going back to the fundamental element, we're ultimately designing a space for us, humankind, the people. So it is an incredibly exciting time to be able to have an open dialogue. And, I see, and there's a lot of trends of our client coming to us, help us understand what is the right method. And we do see, of course, a lot of trends that's in the marketplace as well. I think adoption is somewhat different per organization. There is not one approach for all. There's no one size fits all. And it's putting an importance around how does your organization, how does your team work? How does your people work? What are the makeup those folks? We're in a unique time where there's a 4th generation in the workplace, and they all have a different working style. They all have their own challenges and pain points. So how do we really address to make sure that we're providing the equitable experience? It's not just because you're providing a same type of space for all, well, that may not work. That's not necessarily providing that equitable experience, right? The folks who are introvert, we put a lot of emphasis right now in bringing teams back. And I think the main topic has been around the collaboration. But what about the folks who do not have a proper workplace at home? For various reasons, whether it's, everybody's working and learning from home, therefore they really want to get away and they want to try to find the work-life balance, able to detach from home life, go to work and focus on work and be able to get back to their own personal life. And if they're introvert, it's not necessarily around collaborative spaces what's going to help them thrive, right? They need their concentrative space, they need their quiet space. So I think it's understanding the makeup of our people, makeup of your team, and able to come up with the right strategy. So that bit of an assessment period in the beginning is so crucial, and make sure that we are trying to get as close to it as possible. But I think importantly, everybody's really looking for that crystal ball, right? Somebody to tell us, well, what is the right solution? Well, the bottom line is that there is no perfect solution. We no longer have a data. Everything that we've been designing again since 2019, it's completely irrelevant. So we're in a place where we're trying to learn from what we're doing. And I think we should be okay you're not going to get it perfectly first time. It's okay to fail, but we are going to create an experiential space, but most importantly, have an experimental area where we're constantly learning and evolving from there. I think that's a key.
I know that one of the things that I have read up on a little bit is the idea of designing with hybridity in mind in these spaces, so that you can have the home as kind of this heads down, work on your own type scenario. And then coming into the office is that opportunity to collaborate with others and, do more group oriented work, which I identify myself as like one of the paradoxical kind of social introverts, where it's like I'm capable of like talking to people, but at the same time, there are moments where I need to recharge my batteries, and that's kind of the current work style of my own right now. But yeah, there being no concrete answer in the grand scheme of things is definitely a good way to look at it, especially considering you have a variety of different job functions where, you know, depending upon how you work, there are ways in which you can work completely alone and by yourself, and you don't really need to interact with that many people, or people do need to come in and work.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, with it kind of coming down, I guess, more to sort of a method of thinking when it comes to designing this space, as opposed to having these like actual tried and true best practices that you can apply in any scenario, would you say that education on what you should be looking for is kind of like a part of the conversation?
I think education is a big thing. I think we need to really look at it as a multiple thing. I mean, to finding the right balance of focusing on mental well-being of the workplace isn't just a physical, it's also a behavior component as well. And what I mean by that is we can create all this great space type and variety of space type to provide the autonomy as well as the, options and, choices for various needs. And it could be changing daily basis. It could be changing based on the individual and tasks that they need to focus on. But I do think the things that we do need to emphasize is also around the company's culture. You could create this perfect office, but is a company supporting our team to make sure that one, is there proper resources so that you're not burdening individual and having them feel burned out? And no matter what type of spaces you have, then it doesn't matter. Are we allowing our employee to also be able to disconnect? And I think one of the key things that I hear from, including my staff, including myself and our client, is that while there's a convenience in hybrid work, but at the same time, it's impossible for us to detach. The convenience allow us to, I'll take that 6 a.m. call. Why not? I just roll out of the bed and get on a, Zoom call or team call and able to answer that. Oh, that email, I could still send it out 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. So our work days are actually getting longer. Whereas in the, olden days, if you will, where people used to physically commute to the office, you use that time in commuting to either read a book or unwind. And then when you're in the office, you bring your best self and to collaborate and to focus, and you go back home to your own individual, your personal life. Whereas right now, with the convenience of hybrid, we don't have that. So I do think that it's important for a company to recognize that. How do we create a policy so that it doesn't become that there are weeds of hours, emails are being sent out and people are expected to answer at the time. And also when people are collaborating hybrid workforce, how do we make sure that their experience are equitable? I am currently in Scottsdale. I'm completely remote. So when I do log into meetings and if there are collaborative sessions happening, how do I make sure that my experience is consistent with the people who are physically in the office, so I don't feel like, I'm not able to contribute or my time is not as valued. So that's kind of what I mean by the behavior component. And of course, having a physical space, as we talk about those various space type to support various work style. Neurodiversity is something that we talk quite a bit to make sure that we're providing the cognitive performance and supporting that. And that could be in many different forms. If simple things like having more oxygen in the space, they can help to perform the individual to help to be able to focus, and also for them to have that clarity. Biophilia is something that we talk about quite a bit as well. But there's various different things, but it is just kind of understanding when we're saying education, it's also reflected inward as well as external as well.
Now, it's great that you brought up air quality, because I was actually thinking about lighting as well. I've actually done like a lot of research into, mostly as a result of working with DesignWell, a lot of research into talking about lighting in spaces. And That in and of itself just kind of ties back into biophilia, where the whole point is trying to replicate like the natural patterns of sunlight throughout a space and kind of getting people to connect with nature a little bit more, even if they're not able to like actually be out there in nature.
Yep, absolutely.
So for one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to mental health design and just kind of conversations around mental health in general, when it comes to the office, is that a lot of it is focused on alleviating stress. Kind of like, there's this buildup of stress, it hits a point, and the point is to kind of like lower it down. But for a lot of the stuff that I have seen you talk about, it seems particularly aimed at mitigating that, like not making sure that stress doesn't happen in the first place. So kind of being very proactive about it. What are your thoughts on like designing spaces with this in mind?
Excuse me. I do think that it's crucial. I mean, like I said, I think we used to measure the space by efficiency, the success of the space, by how much do we, utilize every square inch of the space. And we used to have a destination where people can go and collaborate or unwind, but it was still it was a formulaic approach, right? Whereas I think if we really purely go back to some of the fundamental I talk about in my article, even things like fun, bringing sense of humor and the fun back into the work environment, and for a team to be able to bond and socialize. I mean, that's a huge importance in workplace, building the sense of culture and sense of camaraderie, right? And I think if workplace also sense of belonging is huge. And what I mean by that is through various either corporate social responsibility, feeling like their cause means something for the organization and feel that they understand. I think all of that is adding to part of the healthy work culture. I read an article the other day that millennials, they're quite, they know exactly, they want to work for a company where they feel that they're heard, they feel they can imagine themselves to be belong to that organization. And I do think that that's crucial, right? We're talking about, it's not just a place of work. We spend most of our time being part of, working for a company. So, understanding the cause of the company and what's important to them is aligned to your value. Even having a club where you can belong to and like mind and able to converse the different ideas and pain points and able to come together. And also having a company's understanding that they're valued, right? They're the space that, somebody might be a spectrum and they have issue with a certain textures and able to control the lighting and able to pick their workplace so that they are able to bring their best self forward. And perform their best ability. I think all of those are helping. If our people perform and if they're happy, I think company thrives. And that's all part of, I think, how our industry in design can help to ease and increase the not only the productivity, but also the cultural element of the organization. So I think it's an exciting time that people are finally talking about it more now and incorporating into the design. And for once, I feel really we have a huge responsibility to think about what we design down to the color, the lighting, the air quality, the texture, all the fundamental of tactile that has an impact on the organization. It's not just a pretty color. Well, that color may be meaningful to somebody. It's not just a certain texture that can have a meaningful for folks who are visually, they have an issue with the textural and unable to separate where the walls begins and floor starts. So I think we need to deep dive into those elements for us to be able to come up with a better design moving forward.
It almost kind of sounds like modern office design is kind of starting to take cues from residential design in a way. It just in terms of the customization, I guess, being able to have like these more colorful and more intent-based spaces, I should say. I think intent seems to be like a very big focus on a lot of it, but less intent for the organization and more intent for the people working for that organization. I think that's where the key shift in the conversation is happening.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the experiential place, right? People go to coffee shop for a reason. They enjoy it's the whole sensory experience, the mood of the lighting, the texture of the wall, hearing people talking, that sense of energy, and smelling the coffee. People choose to be in that environment to work there. And, while, I'm not trying to emulate that, let's create a coffee shop in our workplace. But if we kind of think about that sensory experience and bring that into the workplace, you're absolutely right. It's the hospitality environment. It's the experience that we're trying to emulate into the workplace, so that when our teams are coming to office, there's a purpose, right? It's not just no longer presenteeism that I have to be in the workplace. Everybody's been proven that people are productive working from home, but there are elements that's lacking, whether it's building the sense of camaraderie or culture. Also being mentor, that's something that as much as we try to emulate, utilizing technology, I think that there have something to be said about that serendipitous interaction and able to get your answers and learn by watching as well. So if we're bringing teams back, I think everybody's really looking for, well, what is that experience? I had autonomy that I could work from anywhere, my bedroom, in my bed, coffee shop, wherever your preference, in my backyard, sitting outdoor. So how do we make sure that when people are coming in, there's that element of experience that we're emulating in the office, so that they feel welcome, they feel belong, they feel productive, they feel they can socialize with their team and learn the company's values. And it's that fundamental.
Now, in sticking with these like ideas that we've been talking about so far, are there any trends that you've kind of noticed where maybe just in terms of like, we can talk about in terms of office design or just well-being design in general for these office spaces? Have you noticed people kind of sticking to this sort of one central idea in a lot of different projects?
I think the central idea thus far is around collaboration, and collaboration in various different ways, some incorporating technology, some going back to sort of the analog way, putting things up on the wall and getting, people's getting up and able to scrum, and the idea of quick 10 to 15 meetings and able to walk away with the ideas, providing that as we talk about the hospitality experience, the welcome center, the experience, or their concierge experience where, I'm coming into office, maybe there I can get my dry cleaning picked up in the office environment. So I'm killing two birds with one stone. I think we're really marrying that idea of how do we provide that fruitful experience for our employees so that they're coming in, that there's a reason. Not only they're able to support their career growth, but also it impacts their personal life as well. I think biophilic and all of that has been common trend thus far. I think it's become more heightened, absolutely, for various reasons, especially in the cities where, not everybody has a backyard that they can access the beautiful, greeneries and whatnot. But it seems to be the main focus around the human interaction, right? Like, how do we interact with people for social reasons, for celebratory reasons, for learning reasons?
Now, one of the things that I've seen also kind of come up, not so much in practice, but a lot in conversation, is people talking about the introduction of these multifunctional spaces within a workplace environment. And more specifically, this emphasis on it being an adaptable space where, in one moment it can be this kind of, as we were talking about, kind of coffee shop lounge area where people can go to relax. And then in the next, people can kind of like file in and gather around and like talk about a project they're working on. How do you think that plays into the design for mental health? Do you think that's beneficial or more detrimental?
I think it's hugely beneficial. I think having certain areas that's designated, and I've been calling that as more of an experimental spaces, if you will, depending on who's utilizing it. There are all the technology that's available. So if my usage is around, dialing with our global team and able to get away with the, quick answers and meetings and problem solve together. Or there might be an analog, ways of meeting where we just may want writable surfaces, whether it's physically on paper and just able to be loose with the ideas. When we're working with having a no data to back any of the fundamentals up, I think having those experimental space could be a really great telling as to, well, how are people utilizing those spaces and what's been really more popular setup of the space that people are utilizing for what reason. And they can really help us to also create a data to design to evolve down the road as well. And again, I go back to the idea of autonomy, right? We've had autonomy for the past 2 years. So for us to go back to very structure and set environment where people can move things and have the control, I think that will be detrimental. So be able to have that flexibility space for organization-wise, gathering data from that, but for employee, for them to have that sense of control so that they are able to work how they would like and make sure that they're able to have a productivity at the end of the day will be key.
Now, just listening to you talk, and I'm sure that, pretty much any designer or architect would probably agree on this one. Designers and architects, they just, so much of the time, they like to explore different topics and they like to kind of have that play out in a lot of their designs too, where it's kind of like a learning experience as we've been talking about. And I'm curious as if in your practice, this exploration has kind of led to any pushback on design proposals you may have submitted for specific projects, and like why that blockage may have occurred.
That's a great question. I think it's a fear of unknown, right? It's just, and again, I go back to a lot of our design was backed by a fact. We've already done this, we've tested this ideas and was successful. Going through a similar situation, client, this type of environment is a successful environment for you. I think providing something that hasn't been tested in the past, there's a sense of uncertainty and feeling a little bit uneasy. And a lot has to do with even change management as well. Not everybody were fortunate enough to have a flexible working or a hybrid working before we all went to pandemic. Pandemic just helped us to kind of create this leveling field. So here, but we have to be cognizant that a lot of organizations, they're coming from slightly different places and they're trying to adapt to this new ways. So some of the pushback, and understandably, might be lack of unknown or fear of unknown. And everybody's kind of trying to figure out, well, has others tried this? Somebody else must have tried it and waiting for a proven case. But, for past year and a half to 2 years, our organization's been incredibly busy and having this phenomenal conversation with our client and getting to know them and helping them to come up with what is a right strategy for now. And then we take that information and learn from it and learn from it and learn from it. So I think if there has been any pushback, like I said, it's the fear of unknown.
Now, before we close out, I did have one question that I wanted to ask you, kind of going back to that idea of trends sort of cropping up in design. Is there anything that you've noticed that kind of a lot of people seem to gravitate to in design projects that you think should kind of be toned back a little bit. Maybe not the most beneficial for mental health in this in these projects.
I think that one of the most dangerous element is thinking that, okay, well, it's about collaboration, bring people back, and then it's all about social space. I think it's the balance. The office cannot be just around collaboration and just only around socialization. It also has to be cognizant with the people who are coming in for various different reasons, and that they may require different type of space. So I think rather than just taking the trends from, well, this is a common trend and this is what we're hearing, I think it's imperative that each organization really need to understand about how their team work and to find the right balance. Because having too many, without understanding and reflecting in our own team, no matter what we're creating, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, right? Because what if your team is actually wanting to come back more for that concentrated reason? And it might be much more smaller scale, individual to duo. But if we've completely removed that and went through all socialization space and collaborative space, then an open setup, well, then that's not the right makeup of the space. So I think it's good to take time to understand who we are, how our team works, and what is the best measure that we can start to set those practices, space types up, and then learn from it. Don't be afraid to try something new. And like I said, nobody's going to get everything perfectly. We're all in the same place now. And taking one step at a time and be okay to evolve.
Yeah, it's that very beautifully said for evolving in a space. It's definitely something that from having worked in like marketing for so long, it's very much that arm of business is very much a try or a test and retest sort of thing. So I guess for me, it's something that's very natural. And I think for businesses, it's very natural, the testing and retesting. It kind of falls into just any sort of strategy that a business may have. So it makes sense that designing a space for it would fall under that same category.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you again for coming on today and talking about this. I feel like, it's definitely mental health design is definitely something that is getting a lot more attention now thanks to COVID. And I would love to see it continue to gain traction even now as, the wariness surrounding COVID is kind of starting to fade away from the world a little bit.
Me too. It's been, if there's any silver lining, I think it's a fascinating and exciting time for us to finally reflect on us, on humankind, and on how people work. And I certainly hope that more conversation and more design and more research is being around mental wellness, around workplace especially.